The figure I'm going to talk about in this lecture is the legendary Greek hero Odysseus. He's one of the very few literary characters who have given a word to the English language, and the word is odyssey. We use odyssey to mean a long journey full of exciting adventures. You might say that the long epic poem about Odysseus, which we call the Odyssey, was the first on-the-road story. Only Odysseus wasn't riding a Harley or driving a pickup truck. He was steering a ship, a 20-oar Greek galley. Long after that first poem about him, though, Odysseus also became something of a symbol. For us, he symbolizes above all the urge to explore, to know, to push beyond the boundaries. First, though, I want to focus on what makes him different from the other Greek heroes who surround him, the heroes of the Trojan War, men like Achilles and Ajax and Diomedes. They're all capital H heroes. As I said in the last lecture, they're big, they're strong, they're fearless. Odysseus is all those things too, but he's something else as well. He's polymetis, the man of many wiles. He's a trickster. I'm going to concentrate on two examples of his resourcefulness out of many, but first I need to just give you some background. The very start of European literature are the two long epic poems in ancient Greek, almost 3,000 years old, and long said to be by the blind poet Homer, called the Iliad and the Odyssey. Odysseus is a prominent figure in the first and the central figure of the second. The Iliad tells the story of a pivotal moment in the very first known event in European history, which was the Trojan War, fully 3,000 years ago. In that war, a Greek alliance besieged and after 10 years destroyed the great city of Troy through the famous stratagem of the wooden horse, a stratagem which was, of course, devised by Odysseus. The Odyssey then tells the story of Odysseus' attempt to return home after the war, to the island of Ithaca. Ithaca is only about 1,000 miles from Troy, but the voyage took Odysseus 10 years. So he was away from home for 20 years. 10 years spent besieging Troy, another 10 trying to get home again. The Odyssey follows the rule of ancient epics, which is not to start at the beginning. It starts near the end of that 10-year return trip, for most of which Odysseus has been held captive by the nymph Calypso on her island, the navel of the sea, which many people think must be Malta, at the center of the Mediterranean. But meanwhile, back in Ithaca, Odysseus has been absent for 20 years, and the nobles of Ithaca want him declared dead. They also want his wife Penelope to choose one of them as her husband, who will inherit Odysseus' property. And to force her into this, a whole crowd of prospective suitors have moved in, demanding to be feasted every day and literally eating their way through Odysseus' herds and stores. The suitors also mean to kill her son Telemachus as a potential avenger. So the poem has three strands. One, at the start, follows Telemachus' attempt to dodge the suitors and round up support. Another, at the end, details Odysseus' return and the cunning tactics of his wipeout of Penelope's suitors. In between, Odysseus is released by Calypso and eventually washed up on the shore of Phaeacia, which many people think must have been Corfu. But at the Phaeacian court, he is asked to tell his story, which he does. The central core of this poem is the real Odyssey. It covers Odysseus' adventures from leaving Troy to reaching Calypso, and there are 10 of them. I should say that to ancient Greeks, these must have been particularly interesting, because they're set in what was to them the Wild West, the Western Mediterranean, into which Greek sailors were only just starting to probe. Some people think we can still identify the places Homer had heard of, like Malta, like Corfu, but also Sicily, the Straits of Messina, Corsica. Odysseus calls up the ghosts of the dead at a great rock by the fire-flamer river, Pyriphlegethon. And it sounds very like the rock of Huelva in southern Spain, by the Red River, or Rio Tinto. Odysseus' 10 adventures include his dealings with Circe the witch, who turns men into beasts, his calling up the ghosts of the dead to get advice from the dead prophet Tiresias, the way he became the only man to hear the song of the sirens and survive, and other famous dangers, like the land of the lotus eaters and sailing between the man-eating monster Scylla and the deadly whirlpool Charybdis. But to highlight the unusual heroic quality I mentioned earlier, Odysseus' trickiness, the adventure I want to detail is his encounter with the Cyclops. What's happened is that after leaving Troy, Odysseus has been blown way off course to the land of the lotus eaters. There, the inhabitants eat a plant which makes them so happy they never want to leave or work or do anything ever again. As soon as Odysseus realizes, he ties up his addicted crewmen, he shoves them under the rowing benches, and he sets off once more. They find a beach where they can pull up their ships on an island close to another island from which they can see smoke rising. Remember that smoke. And Odysseus, curious as always, sets off with one ship to explore and look for provisions. What he has come to is the land of the Cyclopes. They are enormous giants who only have one eye in the middle of their foreheads. They're completely uncivilized with no social organization. Each lives by himself in his cave, herding flocks of sheep and goats and living off milk and cheese, curds and whey. They don't know how to make bread or wine. They're also man-eaters. Odysseus finds the cave of the giant Polyphemus and notes the sheep pens and the pails of milk and racks of cheese. His men very sensibly say, "Let's take the lambs and kids and cheeses and get out of here, back on good salt water." But Odysseus, typically nosy, decides to stick around inside the cave to see the giant. This is a mistake. Polyphemus comes back, brings his sheep inside to milk them, and immediately seals the cave from inside with an enormous boulder. 24 ox teams couldn't move it, says Homer. Odysseus appeals to Polyphemus, reminding him that they are guests, and Zeus, father of the gods, is the protector of guests. Polyphemus, who, as I said, is completely uncivilized, says he doesn't give a hang for Zeus, seizes 2 crewmen, dashes their brains out, and eats them raw. He's going to eat the men 2 at a time at breakfast and dinner time. So you can see, Odysseus has a tactical problem. He's got his sword, and Polyphemus falls asleep as soon as he's eaten. But if Odysseus stabs him or cuts his throat, how are they going to get out? They won't be able to roll the rock aside. And although Polyphemus will open the cave in the morning to let his sheep out, he guards the entrance so the men don't sneak out with them. But remember, he's only got one eye. So what Odysseus does is what they tell you to do in officer training courses. He considers his resources, notes his enemy's weakness, and makes a plan. Remember again, Cyclopes don't know about wine. And wine is one of the things Odysseus has been carrying, part of the rations. It's strong wine too, which the Greeks would drink diluted. 20 parts water to 1 part wine, if you believe Homer. Polyphemus also, like most giants, carries a club, and he's brought an olive tree back to the cave to make into a club. While he's away with his flocks, Odysseus and his men cut a length from the tree, smooth it, sharpen it with their swords, and then hide the stake. Where to hide it? Under the sheep dung, which covers the floor of the cave. Then, when Polyphemus comes back, and after he's had his usual two-man dinner, Odysseus approaches him and offers him the wine, which Polyphemus glugs down, and which, remember, he is not used to. Even the hopelessly uncivilized know they have to make a return gift, and Polyphemus asks Odysseus his name and promises him a return gift. Odysseus says his name is Nobody. And Polyphemus says, okay, his return gift will be to eat nobody last. That's a giant joke. In the night, as Polyphemus lies drunk, the men go to the fire. Cyclopes have fire. Remember the smoke rising? They heat up the 6-foot olive spike till it glows, and then they thrust it in the giant's one eye. He howls for help, and other Cyclopes turn up from their caves nearby and ask him who's attacked him. Polyphemus, of course, shouts out, "Nobody did it." And the other Cyclopes, remember? They're a surly lot with no social organization. They say, "Oh, well then," and go away. In the morning, Polyphemus, who is a good shepherd for all his faults, he rolls the rock aside to let the sheep out, but he sits by the door, running his hands over the sheep to see there's no man with them. But Odysseus has tied the big rams together in threes, using strips of willow from the giant's bed, and slung a man under each one. He goes out last, under the biggest of the rams. Then the Greeks do what they should have done at the start: round up as many sheep as they can, load up their galley, and row for salt water. But Odysseus typically won't leave it at that. He has to taunt Polyphemus and tell him who blinded him. So in spite of the crewmen saying, "Don't bait him, skipper, he's throwing rocks and you'll give him the range," he shouts out, "If anyone asks you, who took your eye, say it was Odysseus of Ithaca, son of Laertes, sacker of cities." And Polyphemus, whose father is the sea god Poseidon, prays to his father to put a curse on him. So Odysseus incurs the enmity of Poseidon, and although his divine protector Athene will not allow Odysseus to be drowned, Poseidon sees to it that it takes 10 years for him to return home. And in those 10 years, he loses all his companions. You can see, this is a Jack the Giant Killer story, but it's very well told. Everything has its place. The smoke, the wine, the giant boulder, the one eye, the nobody trick, even the sheep dung. Odysseus is certainly tricky and resourceful. But is he a good leader? He's a survivor, but you notice that people who are with him don't survive for long. This brings up an issue which is going to concern us many times during this course of lectures, which is different cultural values. A hero in one culture may be a very different thing from a hero in another. Frodo Baggins wouldn't have lasted long as a crewman for Odysseus, and I very much doubt that Odysseus would have been prepared to go over the top with Tolkien's own Lancashire Fusiliers. Odysseus's cultural values are those of a heroic age. That's heroic age in capital letters, and I mean a particular set of social circumstances. These circumstances have only arisen twice in European history. A heroic age comes about after the fall of an empire and a traumatic collapse of civilization. So the second European heroic age is the one which came about after the fall of the Roman Empire, say about 400 to 600 AD, the age of King Arthur and of Beowulf. The first heroic age is harder to date. Most people think that Homer created his poems about 750 years before the birth of Christ. The Trojan War took place maybe 300 years before that. The strange thing is that archaeology has revealed to us that the Greek cities which launched the assault on Troy, Mycenae and Tiryns, and even more remarkably, Knossos on the island of Crete, supported a complex and incredibly bureaucratic civilization. We know about the civilization from things like the gold death masks of Mycenae and the frescoes of Knossos, with their images of acrobats leaping over bulls' horns in a way which cattlemen say is flat out impossible. We know about the bureaucracy because these ancient cities left thousands of records on baked clay tablets. The shock is because Homer knew nothing about all this. The heroes of his poems don't seem even to have heard of writing, and most scholars think that Homer couldn't read or write as well. His poems were composed and passed on for centuries, just by word of mouth. As for the old city civilizations the poems commemorate, they had collapsed so completely that no one even found their treasures, not till the 19th century. You have to ask, what happened and what effect did it have? Hesiod, a Greek poet from about the same time as Homer, gives a clear answer to what happened. His answer, in a phrase, is what we would call imperial overreach. Once upon a time, he says, there was a race of capital H heroes. Grim war destroyed them, some at seven-gated Thebes, some when they crossed the sea to Troy for the sake of Helen. Their death shrouded them. The great cities of southern Greece, in other words, wasted their energy trying to capture the cornlands of central Greece, that's Thebes, and then in a great naval attack on Troy, maybe hoping to seize control of the grain trade with the Black Sea area. The survivors were sitting ducks for new enemies, wild men coming down from the north. Ever since then, says Hesiod, we've been living in an iron age of cruelty and deceit and anarchy. He wishes he'd never been born into it. But going back to Odysseus, the point about the cultural values of a heroic age, a post-collapse of civilization age, is that it's every man for himself and devil take the hindmost. In a heroic age, there's not much more social organization than the Cyclopes have. Anyone who strays outside his kin group is likely to be made a slave. Raiding for women is normal. The fate of women and children, once their protectors have been killed, is very bad. Old people, too. The fate of Odysseus' father, Laertes, may seem strange to us. At start and end of the Odyssey, we're reminded that he's living in poverty, out of town, up in the hills of Ithaca, with one slave woman who acts as his carer. But he was a great hero himself. He sailed with Jason and the Argonauts. He was king of Ithaca. Yes, but he's old, and his son's missing in action, and his grandson is too young. In a heroic age, your authority has no basis except personal violence. There's no police, no law except custom. The only moral restraint is the feeling, which Odysseus appealed to with Polyphemus, that the gods look out for guests and strangers and may punish cruel treatment of them. But of course, you can't count on that. These circumstances may account for some of the complexity of Odysseus' character. I'd put it like this. He'd quite like to be Mr. Nice Guy, but in a heroic age, what can you do? If people were to start thinking you're a wimp, you'd be in a slave pen quick time. In a heroic age, what makes a hero? sword, spear, and shield, helmet, armor, and ability to use them. Lose those, and you can forget about human rights. Democracy hasn't been invented yet. Odysseus himself certainly isn't democratic. His big intervention in Homer's other poem, the Iliad, is to beat up and silence a low-rank soldier who starts talking about going home. However, to be fair, the heroic age Greeks hadn't gotten very far with inventing aristocracy either. It's true, there seems to be a gulf between the ones who call themselves heroes and the rest. I think heroes just means the guys with full armor and battle chariots, the ones who fight in the front rank. But even they know what work is. For example, there's a scene when Odysseus, back in Ithaca and disguised as a beggar man, is being taunted by one of the suitors. How does he respond? He says, "I'm a beggar man now, but I was a hero once. We could have a match at scything. I bet I could mow more hay than you. We could have a match at ploughing. I bet I could plough a straighter furrow." Later British noblemen wouldn't talk like that, still less French seigneur. These Greek heroes aren't democrats or aristocrats. They're autocrats. Power is personal. This means that Odysseus has a problem once he returns home. What's he going to do to get rid of his wife's suitors? Reveal himself and claim his rights? What rights? They'll just cut his throat. Call the Ithacan assembly and demand help. His son tried that and was told, "You're on your own, son." No. Odysseus has to rely on himself. He does have several advantages. One is he's tricky. He's a master of deceit, disguise, and tactics. Another is the nobles of Ithaca may be scheming to replace him, but he has friends among the lower classes. In fact, the slaves. One of the best passages in the poem comes when Odysseus has returned to Ithaca. He's been ferried over by the Phaeacians, who are impressed by his own account of his Odyssey. Now, heavily disguised as an old beggar man, Odysseus is hiding out in the hills with Eumaeus, the swineherd, and the two are just chatting. Odysseus, sticking to his role as a beggar man, tells a pack of lies about his life story, but says that he's seen Odysseus and he's coming home. Eumaeus says, "Good story, but I wish you hadn't put in that bit about Odysseus. I know you're only doing it to get a good reception." Odysseus says, "If I'm telling a lie," which of course he is, "throw me off a rock." And Eumaeus says, "That would get me a good name, wouldn't it? Feeding a guest one day and murdering him the next?" The swineherd really wins that argument. He's dirt poor. He can't even spare the beggar man a shirt because he hasn't got one to spare. But he gives what he can. And he very much resents having to send his prize hogs downtown for those idle suitors to eat. Odysseus has one other useful quality, rare in a capital H hero, and that is self-restraint. Normally, you hit a hero, he hits you back. But Odysseus can keep up his act. Going down into town to make a reconnaissance and dressed as a beggar man, one of his own goat herds kicks him. Odysseus takes it. A suitor throws a footstool at him, and Odysseus takes the hit. Another throws a cow hoof at him, and he just dodges. There's a dangerous moment when another beggar man sees Odysseus as a competitor and tries to drive him off his pitch. The suitors think this is funny and call for a match, the prize to be a haggis, a kind of blood pudding. Some of them notice, as Odysseus reluctantly strips off, that this old guy looks like a boxer. But even then, Odysseus shows restraint. He thinks to himself, Shall I kill the other beggar? Better not. I'll just knock him down and collect the haggis. But danger is there all the time. His old housekeeper sees through his disguise and recognizes a scar. She keeps quiet. Touchingly, at least to an Englishman like me, his old dog Argos also recognizes him. Argos is 20 now. He was only a puppy when Odysseus left for Troy, and now he's been thrown out on a dunghill to die. But he knows his master, and he just has the strength to wag his tail. Odysseus, old softy that he is, silently wipes away a tear. Yes, but what about the tactics? Getting rid of more than 100 suitors is going to be trickier than escaping from the cave of Polyphemus. Odysseus has Eumaeus the swineherd on his side, and Eumaeus his friend the cowherd, and also his son Telemachus, all of them now in on the plot. But they're still outnumbered about 100 to 4. Odysseus develops a 4-point plan. First, there are weapons on the wall of the chamber where the suitors continually feast. Get them out. Take them off to be cleaned. Second, Odysseus is a famous archer, but he left his own great war bow behind when he sailed for Troy. If he can get that back in his hands, okay. Tell Penelope to make this a final test for the suitors. The one who manages to string it and pass a complex shooting test will be her husband. Odysseus is confident that no one will be able to do it. But after a few have failed, he'll go up and have a try himself, the old beggar man, just as a joke. Third, no one must escape to go for reinforcements or weapons. The cowherd will slip out and quietly bar the outer door and lash the bar down. Finally, once Odysseus has the bow and starts shooting, the suitors will still have swords at their belts, and if they have any sense, they will rush him. Odysseus' supporters will put on full armor with spears and shields and keep them off till he has shot all his arrows. By then the suitors will be panicked, and Odysseus and his armored helpers will finish the job. It doesn't work quite according to plan, but it works. Odysseus is merciless. Surrenders are not accepted, except for the bard and the herald, whose office is protected by Zeus. The maidservants, who lay disloyally with the suitors, are strung up to a ship's hawser and hanged. A famous line in the poem is, "Their feet danced for a little while, but not for long." And then Odysseus can rescue his old father from the hovel where he's been living, almost like the old dog Argos. Rejoin his faithful wife Penelope, resume rule over Ithaca. Odysseus can be grim, he can be tender-hearted, about his old dog anyway. He can show restraint in the face of provocation, but above all, he's tricky. He's a survivor. Later ages, I have to say, were not too happy about this. Stern moralists like Plato thought that Homer should be banned altogether. Greek dramatists played up Odysseus' reliance on deceit. And as we shall see in the next lecture, the Roman poet Virgil created a kind of anti-Odysseus in his hero Aeneas. Aeneas moves in the same world as Odysseus, Cyclopes included, but his social values are far different from those of a real heroic age. And yet, Odysseus, under the Roman form of his name Ulysses, continued to fascinate. 2,000 years after Homer, the Italian poet Dante encountered Ulysses where you might expect to find him, deep down in hell, in the circle reserved for false counselors. But not even hellfire can break Ulysses' spirit. Dante has him describe, speaking from the heart of the fire in which he burns eternally, how he set out in old age on one last voyage for no reason but to see new things, to boldly go, as they say in Star Trek, our modern Odyssey, where no one has been before. Another 7 centuries later, and Tennyson rewrote the scene without the condemnation in his poem Ulysses. Its concluding words are, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. And we will come across those lines again, even later in this course of lectures, set very much in our own time. Don't the great tales never end? Well, you know the answer to that. But they change. They get adapted, often in ways their first creators could never even have imagined, as we shall see in the next lecture. They still speak to us, and their heroes and heroines come back revived. Almost like Dracula. And we shall hear much more of him as well.